Yeah, we all know that feeling.
Yeah.
Like, when there's something really important that you need to do, but somehow, like cleaning out the junk drawer suddenly feels way more appealing.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yeah.
So if that sounds familiar, you are definitely not alone. And today we're going to dive deep into procrastination.
Yeah.
Why we do it, but more importantly, how we can actually break free from it.
That's right.
Like starting right now.
Yeah. We are going to give you some real strategies that you can start using like today to stop putting things off.
Yes, exactly. Think of this as like a personal strategy session to really reclaim your energy and actually get things done.
Exactly.
All right, so let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
So why do we even procrastinate in the first place?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Because our brain sometimes seems to like actively sabotage our own best intentions.
Totally. Like, why does that looming deadline suddenly make, like, organizing our sock drawer feel so incredibly important?
It's so weird.
It really is.
Well, one of the things that's really interesting here is how our emotions and our executive function, they kind of work together, So procrastination, it's often not really a time management problem like we think it is, but it's more of an emotion regulation problem.
Okay, interesting.
So for example, let's take fear of failure, right?
Yeah.
So we have this anxiety about not succeeding at something.
Right.
And that can actually make us want to avoid the task altogether.
Oh, so you're saying it's not about being lazy.
Yeah.
It's more like we're trying to protect ourselves from those negative feelings,
That's exactly it.
like that potential disappointment. So it's easier to just not even start.
Right, and that anxiety, it can feel so unpleasant that we just go to avoidance as a way to cope with it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And then, there's perfectionism,
Oh, yeah?
which, we think of as a good thing, right?
Yes.
But it can really get in the way when it comes to actually starting something.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Well, because it kind of sets this impossibly high bar, and we wait for the perfect moment.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely been there.
Like,
Like waiting for everything to align.
exactly.
So you have this like perfect vision in your head.
Right.
And if you can't make it happen perfectly, you just don't even try.
Exactly. And that perfect scenario, it rarely happens, right?
Right. Never.
So what perfectionism really does is it creates this, what we call analysis paralysis.
Okay.
So you're so afraid of not meeting your own standards that you end up doing nothing at all.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point.
And then another big piece of this puzzle is that feeling of being completely overwhelmed.
Oh, yeah. I know that one.
Right.
Like you look at this huge project
Right.
and it just feels like there are a million different things to do.
A million moving parts.
And your brain just shuts down.
Right. It's too much.
It's too much to process. Yeah.
And it's not just the size of the task.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes it's also like a lack of clarity about, what actually needs to be done.
Right.
So if you don't have a clear plan, or a really good understanding of all the steps involved, it's easy to just kind of get stuck.
Yeah, it's like trying to put together like a piece of furniture without the instructions.
Right.
You're just looking at all these pieces and you're like, I don't even know where to begin.
You're like, I give up.
Exactly.
Right. And then, of course, we have, the allure of instant gratification.
Oh, yeah, we can't forget about that.
Right. That's a big one.
Like, why do the hard thing when you can just scroll through social media?
Totally. So like you said, checking social media, binge watching a show,
Right.
all those things, they give us like this immediate pleasure, this quick hit of dopamine. And compared to like the delayed gratification of actually finishing something important or challenging,
Right.
those distractions, they usually win.
Yeah, they do.
Right? They win the battle for our attention.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the reasons why we procrastinate.
Yeah.
But what's the real cost here? Like, what's the actual impact of putting things off?
Yeah, that's the important question, right? Like, what's it actually costing us?
Exactly.
So if we think about it in terms of our well-being,
Right.
the costs are pretty big, starting with just like the emotional burden.
Okay.
So think about like all the stress that builds up, as deadlines get closer and
Yeah.
you're scrambling to catch up.
Yeah, or that anxiety that you just kind of carry around with you.
Right, because there are things that you should be doing.
Exactly.
And then there's the guilt,
Oh, yeah.
that feeling of like, I should be working on this.
Right, it's like this constant inner critic.
Yeah, totally. It's like carrying around this invisible baggage.
Exactly.
And on top of all that emotional stuff, Think about the opportunities that you might be missing out on.
Oh, yeah.
And these can be big things, like
Right.
a promotion that you don't get because you didn't finish a project on time.
Right.
But they can also be smaller, everyday things,
Okay.
Like
yeah.
maybe you don't reach out to a valuable contact. Or you miss like a limited time offer on something because you just kept putting off making a decision.
Yeah, so many little things like that that just kind of slip away.
They really do. And if procrastination becomes like a really ingrained habit,
Okay.
the long-term effects, they can be pretty damaging,
In what ways?
Well, it can affect your career, how far you can go.
Uh-huh.
It can affect your relationships.
Okay.
And ultimately, it can impact your overall sense of fulfillment and accomplishment.
Yeah, because you're never really reaching your full potential if you're constantly putting things off.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is definitely something we need to address.
Right.
So let's shift gears and talk about solutions.
Yeah.
What can we do?
Okay, so what actionable strategies can our listeners use, to really take control and break free from this cycle?
Give us the good stuff.
Okay, so one really effective technique to overcome that initial inertia, that feeling of just like not being able to start,
Yeah, just being stuck.
is something called the 2-minute rule.
The 2-minute rule. Okay, I like the sound of that. Tell us more.
Okay, so the basic idea is to take any task, even if it seems really huge and overwhelming,
Okay.
and break it down into a tiny first step that you can do in less than 2 minutes.
Okay.
And the focus here isn't on finishing the whole thing,
Mhm.
it's just on starting it.
Oh, I see.
So even that tiny little action,
Right.
it can help you kind of get over that feeling of being overwhelmed.
So like if you have to write a big report,
Right.
the 2-minute step could be just opening the document and typing the title.
Exactly.
Or like if you're trying to start working out, it could be as simple as putting on your workout clothes.
That's it.
So it's
Yeah,
really
but-
just about like lowering that barrier to entry.
Exactly. You're making that first step so easy
Right?
that you kind of bypass that mental resistance to starting.
And then hopefully once you start, you just keep going.
Right. Often that's what happens.
Okay, I like it.
So building on this idea of, structured action,
Uh-huh.
time blocking and prioritization are also super important.
Okay, so you're talking about like actually scheduling time in your calendar
Yeah.
for specific tasks.
Exactly.
Okay, so it sounds simple enough.
Yeah.
But I think actually doing it consistently is where people get tripped up.
It is.
So why is this so effective?
Well, because you're making this intentional decision about how you're going to spend your time and energy.
Okay.
So you're proactively committing to those tasks.
Right.
And that makes it less likely that they'll get pushed aside by, less important but more fun things.
Yeah, those pesky distractions.
Right, exactly. And when it comes to deciding, which tasks to actually schedule and tackle first,
Uh-huh.
the Eisenhower matrix is a really helpful tool.
Okay, so this is about figuring out what's urgent versus what's important.
Exactly.
Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Absolutely. So the Eisenhower matrix basically has you categorize your tasks
Okay.
into 4 different quadrants
Yeah.
based on whether they're urgent and important.
Go ahead.
So the first quadrant is urgent and important. Those are your top priorities. You got to do them now.
Okay.
And then there's important but not urgent.
Okay.
So you want to schedule those for focused work time later.
Right.
Then there's urgent but not important.
Okay.
So those are things that you can delegate if possible,
Wow.
because they often just distract you from your main goals.
Right.
And then the last quadrant is not urgent and not important.
Okay.
So those are the time wasters, You want to eliminate those or at least minimize them as much as possible.
Yeah, get rid of those.
So this whole system,
Right.
helps you to really focus your energy on the things that are actually going to move you towards your objectives.
Okay, so it's like a way to cut through the noise and really zero in on what matters.
That's it.
Okay, I like it.
Now, how do we quiet that inner critic,
Right.
that perfectionist voice that's always holding us back?
Yeah, like how do we get over that hurdle?
Yeah. So this is where we need to shift our mindset
Okay.
and start embracing progress over perfection.
Yeah.
So it's about choosing to value forward momentum,
Uh-huh.
even if it's not perfect, over trying to achieve this like unattainable ideal right from the start.
So basically we need to internalize that saying done is better than perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because, the beginning stages of any project, they're rarely going to be perfect.
Right.
And that's totally fine.
Totally.
The goal is just to get something down, to create that foundation.
Yeah.
And then you can build on it and refine it later.
Okay.
So this approach, it takes away a lot of the pressure that we put on ourselves.
Right.
And that pressure is what often leads to procrastination.
So true.
And then to support this idea of, making progress,
Yeah.
We need to set goals that are actually effective.
Okay.
And that's where the SMART framework comes in.
SMART goals.
SMART goals, exactly.
Okay, remind us what that stands for.
So SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
All right, so instead of having a vague goal like be more productive, a SMART goal would be something like finish the first draft of my presentation by Friday at 5 p.m.
Exactly.
So it's much more concrete.
Yes.
And you know exactly what you need to do.
Right. And that clarity,
Yeah.
it helps to get rid of a lot of that mental fog that can fuel procrastination.
Yeah, for sure.
So now what if you're still struggling to stay on track?
Yeah.
You know, even with all these strategies.
Yeah, it happens.
It does.
So what else can we do?
Well, that's where accountability can be really helpful.
Okay, so like having someone to keep you on track,
That's it.
like an accountability partner.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So sharing your goals with someone you trust, you know, like
Yeah.
a friend or family member or a colleague,
Okay.
it can give you that extra motivation and support
Right.
because knowing that someone else is aware of your commitment,
Uh-huh.
it can make you feel more responsible
Yeah.
and less likely to procrastinate.
Yeah, for sure. And there are also like apps and online tools that can help with this too, right?
Yes, totally. There are lots of great progress tracking apps out there
Okay, cool.
that can kind of serve that same purpose.
So it's like having a built-in cheering section, but also a little bit of a nudge.
That's a good way to put it.
Exactly.
And what about celebrating the small wins along the way?
Oh yeah, we have to talk about that.
Right.
So like acknowledging your progress.
Yeah, positive reinforcement is so important for building new habits.
Right.
So, you know, reward yourself for completing tasks,
Mhm.
even if they're small.
Yeah.
It creates this positive association with taking action,
Right.
and it helps you to build momentum.
So like after you finish a task that you've been dreading,
Right.
you could take a break
Yeah.
or have a cup of coffee or do something enjoyable for a few minutes.
Exactly. It's all about acknowledging your effort
Yeah,
and reinforcing those good behaviors.
exactly.
Now let's think about how to make these changes last.
Okay.
You know, how do we turn these into habits that can really resist that urge to procrastinate?
Yeah, it's not just about willpower.
No, definitely not.
It's about making these behaviors more automatic.
Exactly. So consistency is key here.
Okay.
So the more consistently you do something,
Uh-huh.
the stronger the neural pathways in your brain become,
Interesting.
which makes that behavior easier and more automatic over time.
So you're basically rewiring your brain.
You're training your brain.
Okay, cool.
And the idea of a keystone habit is really helpful here.
A keystone habit? What's that?
So a keystone habit is basically one positive change
Okay.
that can kind of trigger a chain reaction and lead to other good habits.
Oh, wow. So it's like one habit that can have a ripple effect on other areas of your life.
That's it.
Okay.
So for example, you know, maybe you commit to a regular sleep schedule,
Got you?
and that might lead to you having better focus during the day,
Uh-huh.
and then you're more likely to exercise consistently.
Oh, I see. So it all kind of builds on itself.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then to really solidify these habits, visual cues in your environment can be super helpful.
Okay, so like reminders.
Yes.
Yeah.
So put reminders in places where you'll see them regularly,
Uh-huh.
and that can prompt you to take action.
Okay, so like leaving your to-do list in a visible spot
Exactly.
or setting out everything you need for a task the night before.
That's it.
Okay, those are good tips.
So creating an environment that supports your goals is really crucial.
Yeah, for sure.
And this includes your physical workspace,
Oh, yeah.
you know, where you actually work.
So how does decluttering your workspace actually help you to focus and be more productive?
Well, think about it, you know, a messy environment. It
Yeah.
can create a messy mind.
Mhm.
So when you have a clean and organized workspace,
Right.
you're minimizing those visual distractions,
Okay.
and it makes it easier to concentrate.
I could definitely attest to that.
It creates a sense of calm and control,
Yeah.
which makes it easier to focus.
A tidy workspace just makes me feel more in control
Right.
and more ready to get things done.
Exactly. So what are some other ways to minimize those distractions?
Yeah, are there any other tips you can give us?
Yeah, well, turning off notifications on your devices is a big one.
Oh, yeah, that's a must.
Right. Get rid of those.
Okay.
Also, having a designated work area,
Uh,
even if it's just a small corner of your room,
Okay.
it can really help to signal to your brain that it's time to focus.
Yeah, like setting boundaries.
Exactly. And then you can also use techniques like the Pomodoro technique.
Okay, what's that?
So the Pomodoro technique is where you work in focused bursts
Okay.
for like 25 minutes,
Uh-huh.
and then you take a short break,
Okay.
and then you repeat that cycle.
So it's like a structured way to work.
Yeah, it can really enhance your focus and concentration.
Okay, go.
Now, even with all of these strategies,
Right.
we all still hit mental roadblocks sometimes, right?
Totally.
So what can we do in those moments? Like, how do we navigate that resistance?
Well, this is where we need to build up our inner resilience.
So mindfulness exercises or deep breathing techniques can be really helpful for reducing anxiety and improving focus.
So like before you tackle a challenging task.
Exactly. Even just a few minutes of mindful breathing
Okay.
can help to calm your nervous system and clear your head.
Yeah, like a reset button.
Exactly. And you mentioned a visualization exercise. So
Yeah.
can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, how does that work?
So visualization is basically where you take a few minutes to really imagine yourself successfully completing a task.
Okay.
You know, the one that you've been putting off.
Uh-huh.
So you picture all the steps involved,
Okay.
how you're going to feel as you make progress,
Right.
and then that feeling of accomplishment when you're done.
So it's like a mental rehearsal.
It's like creating a mental blueprint for success,
Okay.
and that can really boost your confidence
Yeah.
and reduce those feelings of overwhelm.
Okay, so it's like tricking your brain into believing that you can do it.
Yeah, in a way, it's like giving yourself that extra bit of motivation.
Okay, I like it.
So to sum up, all the key strategies that we've talked about,
Yes.
we have start small with the 2-minute rule,
Okay.
implement time blocking, and prioritize using the Eisenhower matrix.
Uh-huh.
Cultivate that mindset of progress over perfection.
Right.
Set those well-defined SMART goals.
Okay.
Find an accountability partner or use a tracking app.
Uh-huh.
Reward your efforts with positive reinforcement.
Okay.
Build those lasting habits through consistency and those keystone habits.
Yeah.
Create a supportive environment by decluttering and minimizing distractions.
Right.
And then navigate those mental roadblocks with mindfulness and visualization.
Okay, wow. That was a lot.
Yeah,
But so much good stuff.
it is.
Like a whole toolkit for conquering procrastination.
Yeah, it is a toolkit that you can start using right away.
Exactly. So now the most important part is to actually take action.
That's it.
Like right now.
Right now, as we wrap up this deep dive,
Uh-huh.
I want you to think of one task that you've been putting off.
Just one.
Just one. And commit to taking that very first small step in the next few minutes.
Yeah, what's that 2-minute action?
Remember the 2-minute rule?
Yeah.
What's one tiny thing that you can do right now?
So maybe it's sending an email or making a phone call or just open a document.
Yeah, whatever it is, just do it.
Just start.
Because, as Mark Twain said, the secret of getting ahead is getting started.
I love that quote.
Right. It's so true.
So remember, progress isn't about making these huge leaps.
Uh-huh.
It's about those consistent small steps forward.
Right.
And every single action that you take, no matter how small it seems, it moves you closer to your goals.
So keep that in mind.
Yeah,
And keep moving forward.
that's it.
All right, that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Yep, for joining us.